Okay, so welcome back to what is only the second time I've ever attempted to integrate audio and video into this newsletter, but we have an auspicious guest here to talk about some really important things for sales leaders and CROs, specifically around hiring and building the team. And this is core to what CROs need to do. So I want to welcome Amy Volas. She runs Avenue Talent Partners. And so before we jump into the conversation here, Amy, you want to just give yourself a quick introduction?
Sure. So I started Avenue Talent Partners 10 years ago. Prior to that, I grew up in the HR tech, people, talent acquisition industry, selling products and services. Had a very successful sales and sales leadership career myself. So when we are talking about this, I've made all these mistakes myself, and that's why I'm here to help. But ATP, we do two things. We help founders, CEOs, and executives hire executive sales and CS leadership all the way through CRO. And then when we're not doing that, we work with executives, founders, and CEOs to help them bridge their hiring gaps. So when we're not on a search, we can talk about all the fun things that we do inside of search to make things better. So that's my jam. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. And Hayes, I love you for having me here. So thank you. And for anybody that's listening, thank you. Appreciate you. Should we disclaim me, Hayes? You know me really well. Maybe not everybody does. So if I nerd out, it sounds like I'm yelling and I'm not. I just get really passionate about this. So I'm not judging any of you. I'm not mad at any of you. This is just the stuff that gets my blood pumping in the morning and in the day. Those are my tricks up my
Okay.
sleeve.
All right. I appreciate the disclaimer, so I can turn down the volume a little bit. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to know Amy for a while now. She's been a wealth of advice for things that we're doing at Gradient Works. I feel like I've been adopted by Amy a little bit as like sort of a hiring fairy godmother. So I really appreciate you being part of this. So. Let's start off with what I think is a pretty interesting one. What do you think, in your experience, is the biggest difference between a CRO that actually manages to scale and one that gets fired?
This is a topic I'm so glad that we started here. This is a topic near and dear to my heart from the standpoint that it's twofold and one sort of feeds into the other. So, especially over the last 15 years, the market was bananas. And I find so many folks got promoted very, very quickly. And there were some key things that were skipped along the way. And the universe has an interesting way of working out where you have to go back and learn those things. So the things that I'm talking about are twofold that I see drive my business. So 57% of my business comes from when a founder or a CEO mishires, and oftentimes they've done it on more than one occasion. So I've got 10 years of data on this. And what's interesting is the first thing, the CRO comes in, they're hired, you go through the interview process, you talk about the problems, the challenges, the goals, what it'll be like if we work really well together. And that person takes that as like the be all end all. Great, I've got it. I know what you need. I did my 30, 60, 90-day presentation. We agreed on this. We stamped it. It's got the seal of approval. The board is excited about it too. Let's go. And the thing is, that's like the very tip. If you think about like the iceberg and the Titanic, it's like the very tip of the iceberg. And there's a whole lot more underneath the water. And I think oftentimes, especially in hiring, we've been programmed to sell each other. So you, Hayes, as a founder CEO, if you want this person, you better sell them on Gradient Works. And then on the flip side, it's like, if I want this role, I better sell them on my ability, my competency, how many exits I've had, all the fancy things that I can talk about. And there's this miss of the messy middle of the actual work. And so now we get to this. I hear what I've heard, we've validated it together, but oftentimes a CEO, a founder, an executive team, if they're not specialists in go to market and it's a CRO role, and let's say it's a true CRO role where it's an executive leader of lots of different kinds of teams that are all revenue generating, there's a lot of complexity there. And I promise you, in a 3-week interview process, you've only scratched the surface. So that context leads to door number one. Door number one is your read, rinse, repeat playbook is going to get you fired. If you come in and you just shove it down somebody's throat, so it doesn't mean that you can't have a playbook. It doesn't mean that you can't have tricks or tools that you pull out, but it's that ability to discern which ones you pull out at what time, what's appropriate, and realizing that some of the things that you've done before that have been read, rinse, repeat, tried and true, they may not necessarily apply here. And so that's one major thing where it's like they knew how to do these two or three things. And then as our business evolved, or as we got into the meat of what was really going on, they had no idea what to do. And they were looking to me or they were looking to others. And so that's one. Um, and then I think the other piece is uh, the inability to keep the seat at the table. So I have this conversation a lot with executives when we go through our hiring process, where it's one thing to get hired and to get that seat. It's a very different thing to keep it. And that means that your job as a CRO, as an executive, is to have the hard conversations, to set expectations early and often, not to just be a yes person. And I think about a story that's going to drive this point home with folks that are not going to be mentioned to protect them. But there is a VC that I work quite a bit with. And one of the things that he shared with me was this fascinating story. He said, who do you think got fired? The CEO slash founder or the CRO? And I was like, CRO all day long. Here was the story. CEO comes down and says, look, we have this number. We've got to hit this number, and commits that number to the board without really a lot of discussion with the other bits and pieces in the business that would make or break that number. And that's not just sales. That's going to be CS. That's going to be marketing. That's going to be product. That's like the whole sum of the parts. So he commits a number. The number is like 85 million. The CRO says there's no way we're going to get to that 85 million. We're going to get to like 43 if we're lucky. And here's why. Had the data, had all of the information, also was communicating with this operating partner that I know from this VC, and was like, if I'm missing something, let me know. Was super transparent about here's why. And the CEO said, that's not your problem to manage that. That's mine. Just go get the number. Well, what do you think happened? They hit like 42 and a half. That's not good. That's a big whiff. Who do you think got fired, Hayes?
You can guess. It wasn't the CEO.
It was the CEO.
Good. All right. Well, I'm glad.
The moral of the story as to why CROs go wrong, he wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. He
Mhm.
came with data, not just a feeling. He managed expectations early and often up to the CEO, across the executive team, and across the board, not throwing the CEO under the bus so that when the tough questions were answered, the CEO couldn't just point the finger to the CRO. Because we always think about that, right? CRO is the sacrificial lamb. But not if you're keeping that seat at the table and understanding how to have these conversations without throwing people under the bus, without getting down and dirty and ugly. This person did it, chef's kiss. Those are the two things.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I let's dig into that story a little bit because I mean that is an interesting outcome, and the kind of challenges you're describing are things that CROs are dealing with all the time. Those kind of cross-functional relationships with their other folks who are on the leadership team, managing up to the CEO. But one thing, just to dig into that a little bit, it sounds like they were also able to manage to the board as well. So I'm curious what you've seen in terms of if you are a CRO who's dealing with what seems to be a plan that's not fully baked. Maybe go a level deeper. What is it that you can do to effectively manage that process across those stakeholders and with the board to ensure that like there's visibility on why these things might be challenges, so you can be in that good situation.
I think it starts, so I live and die by this mantra of setting expectations early and often together. And I think it really starts in the hiring process. So, going against what we talked about before, where it's like, well, let's just sell each other and get to the outcome and give me the offer and then we'll figure it out later. And not that people say that out loud, But that's what ends up kind of happening subconsciously. If I'm a CRO and I'm in the interview process, and by the way, for any CEO or founder that's listening to this, please do this as well. So this is a two-sided advice coin here. Get as close to what it's really going to be like, the good, the bad, the ugly, because when you're aligned, it sells itself. You don't have to over rotate to sell. But if I'm the CRO, I would say if there's a board, who is your most active board member? Who is the person that has the most to say about what they think you should do, why they think you should do it? Because, hey, as you know this, you have money. There's always the one. We won't talk about who that is, but there's always the one that has the biggest voice that pushes you the hardest. And that push also hopefully helps you grow because you've chosen your board wisely. But sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. If I'm the CRO, to answer your question specifically, I want to know that information. And then I want to, before I accept any offer, to spend time with that person or those people so that I'm hearing what their expectations are, where they're thinking the numbers are coming from, what their formula is, what their success metrics are. Then I want to compare and contrast that to what I'm hearing direct from the rest of the executive team, the founder, CEO. And then I want to talk about that to say, here's the shift. Maybe I heard something wrong, or maybe there's more context to this, but if I'm responsible for this, and there's a little bit maybe of a different story between the two, how are we going to solve for that together? Because I've seen this before. So remember, people also want the fact that you have competence, but you also have confidence. And so there's a difference with this, not arrogance, but like, hey, I've seen this before. This is where it gets twisted up into an icky knot that's really hard to unravel later. Here are three ways that I'm thinking about it. How are you thinking about it? You now have that motion that's starting to be built versus waiting way down the line when something gets messy and you see something and you want to say something, but you've never said anything before. So now it's this disruptive conversation. If you're coming through as the executive that you really are and you're showing the multidimensional lens that you can operate from, where, yes, these are the things that I'm excited about. Yes, this is how I can help you. And here are some things that I've heard already that we need to address together. Let's talk about how we're going to do that together. So now, if I'm in motion with you and something changes, I can anchor back to that to say, remember when we talked about that and we agreed that this would work? Why are we changing that right now? We're getting a little bit off track, and I want to make sure that we get back on. That's then how you can go back and then discuss with the board. Hey, heard this from you. This actually over here, I'd love to get your opinion on that. Maybe they don't agree with you and maybe they push you back to the CEO, but they can't unknow what you've shared.
Well, so let's kind of travel down the path with this theoretical CRO, right? Like, so let's say you do this, evaluation, you do the right things in that initial process, you get a sense of we're all aligned, I'm going to take this role, right? And so I think there's kind of a dual set of challenges that come in when you start taking on a role. And one of those big challenges is looking at your existing team, thinking about what's got to change, what doesn't need to change. Like, you probably gotten a lot of that out. You've aired some of those things in the, hiring process, hopefully. But one of the things that, just to kind of click into this a little farther, what's one of the biggest people related moves that you should make in your first 90 days, right? You've probably got a sense coming in, here's some things that I think, but what's the first thing you should dig into when you're thinking about your team, your people, and your hiring plan in that kind of critical early period?
The job's to be done.
Okay.
And so I can't tell you, Hayes, how many 30, 60, 90s I've seen or presentations I've seen in my career. And they all say the same thing, right? The first 30 days, I'm going to listen. I'm going to understand. I'm going to spend time with the team. But I find that after something isn't working out, or when I get that call where it's, hey, what's available in the market? What are you seeing out there? I think I made the wrong move and I diagnose what's going on. There are some common themes. And I think the first thing is you come in with an already baked plan. And there's already some big assumptions about what you think should happen. And if the team doesn't look the way you want them to look, you might be understanding who's on the team, but really digging into, well, what is the role that they're actually doing? And maybe they're better suited over here. Maybe they're great. Maybe. There's lots of different variables there. But before I can bring in my big gun that I worked with before, because I find that many people have an already baked list of these are the people that I'm bringing. And by the way, it is written in lots of different places as a best practice to ask somebody when they're interviewing, who are you going to bring with you? Okay, that's great, but why? And I know that people ask why. And those two things are important data points, but when I get there, does it match? Does the punishment fit the crime, so to speak, right? So, like, do these things go together? And I find that that third rung is missing. So I come in with, for me to prove myself, I have to bring in my own big guns. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are like, I got this new boss. And this might be the CRO. You know, CRO gets a new boss with a CEO or a president or a COO or whoever it might be. And it's like, they're not even interested in me. I already know that I'm going to get replaced. That's why I want to talk to you. You know that feeling when it's so clear. Don't be that person because you might have some massive untapped talent that's going to help you save time and save money and create efficiency. Those are the things that we're all talking about today and reduce risk. But you have to know, and that starts, in my opinion, with the actual jobs to be done. Do we know what the jobs to be done are? Not, I have inbound, I have outbound, I have demand gen, I have a whole ABM strategy, I have SDRs. You have that, but what makes each one of those things successful and what makes each one of those things not successful? And do we really know where the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats are? And if we don't, all you're doing then is throwing talent at something and not addressing the fundamental jobs to be done.
So, I think that that leads to a question that I think is really important. And I've seen this myself because I've been in scenarios where there's been PE takeovers, which are, usually they've got their playbook, their approach, right? I've been in situations actually where I came in alongside some folks who were new leadership, right? So one of those guns coming in, right? I think one of the things that's always tough is to quickly assess. You can assess the jobs to be done, and you're absolutely right about that. And then once you have that view, it's, do I have the right people to go tackle those jobs? So, it's not one size fit all. I shouldn't just bring in, so and so for my last role. It's, are they the right fit for what we need? But, jumping in with a team that, you've got folks who maybe been in seat for a couple of years or have been in seat for a decade or whatever. How do you really assess whether they're the right people once you've got that job to be done, like, figured out? Like, what are some things maybe you can share on how to really dig in and understand, like, who's right for what needs to be done and who might need to move on?
So I want to assess the how and the why behind the performance. So I can look at data. This is the thing that people get confused by. I've got data. We all have data. You have to have data. You want to make data-driven decisions. But I try to help people press pause and say, do you know the context behind the data? And so that's the very first thing is, what's the context behind the data? So if I'm running a gong report, right? And I'm listening to 3 sales calls, does that actually give me enough of a sample size? Have I even spent time with this person to understand, well, maybe that week, maybe their dog died and they were just having a really bad week and they weren't their best, but now I've got this hidden gem. So I think it's the assessing kind of behind the metric piece. So it's going and stepping outside of your spreadsheet and spending time with the team, spending time listening to the calls, inspecting the deals. One of the very first things that I find that people don't do, and this comes from CRO all the way down to head of sales, is we have these stages, right? We have our CRM system, we have the stages. Does the entire team know what each stage actually means and how to actually log it? Because one of the common themes is, I can't get my team to use the system and forecast the right way. And we have a big problem. And hey, CRO, I want you to come in and fix that. You know where it starts? Nobody knows even what it means, and they have their own magical mystery tour of what the shade of gray is in that. And so that's an easy correction, right? That's an easy thing to then say, oh, now I can assess. Now I can actually assess what's actually happening here between this stage and this stage. This is where we're getting killed. Our data shows that. But I now have the context. They didn't understand what that was, and people were afraid to give that deal up because of whatever it might be, or we have a sandbagging issue, or whatever it might be. Now I can actually understand, is this a training issue? Is this like a dastardly deed issue? Is this a competence issue? Like what actually is happening here? The other thing that I love to do, and it's something super, super actionable, you can have some fun with it if you're willing to do it as well, is to do a time study, right? So I want to understand, and there are free tools out there. There's also tools that you can pay for. If everyone does a time study for the next 2 weeks and I understand how people are spending their time, and then I compare and contrast that to the other things that we've already talked about, now I have a real good understanding of what's going on.
Do you find that that's helpful both with ICs and the leadership team that you're inheriting?
Yeah, it's why I said, be willing to do it yourself,
Yeah.
and then have fun with it. I always say create a Slack channel for it and have fun with it. And I've done this with my team as well, where it's like, I didn't realize how much water I was drinking. I take a lot of bathroom breaks in the day. Like just have, you can have, because if you're willing to do it, I believe leadership starts with what we show and what we're willing to do. And there's nothing that I am willing to ask you to do that I'm not willing to do myself. It's hard to ask people to really lean into that and to do it without being able to do it yourself. So, you know what? As I'm getting up to speed as a CRO, that's a great way to earn trust and respect with your team, to be willing to show what you're doing as you're getting up to speed to help them and to help them help you and vice versa and all the things.
Got it. I'm hoping the one takeaway from this isn't make your team drink less water so they have fewer bathroom breaks.
Don't dehydrate your team.
Yeah,
That's not,
don't dehydrate the team. I think that's fair. Maybe that will be the takeaway.
as I keep a sip of water.
Yeah. So, you know, thinking about the kind of comparing and contrasting the ICs to the leadership team that you're trying to assemble, because a CRO at a somebody I think who's truly in a CRO role, they're not managing ICs for the most part, right? There's layers there, and so let's talk a little bit about that. Like we're fast forwarding a little through this CRO's kind of journey that we're discussing, and so you've thought through your jobs to be done. You've looked at the team that you have in place, right? And now we're getting to a little bit more, I would say kind of not steady state, but it's like, how do I really start to build, right? And so one of the things that you've been really helpful for me and in our conversations is helping me think about, you know, how to build a leadership team, what we're looking for, how to think about structuring that. How should CROs think about building the process that ensures that they have the right leadership team at all times, thinking through like how do they build an effective hiring process? Because, and this goes for ICs, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think your job as a CRO a lot of times is to build the machine that builds the machine, right? And so what is that world class hiring process for your VPs, your directors, your line managers look like?
I think about it this way. Most hiring plans operate from a reactive place, right? So I have attrition, I have turnover, I have funding, I have a mandate, we have a new market segment. Um, I have to hire.
Mhm.
And I think that does not work as well. I think about strength and weakness. Weakness, reaction. Strength, being proactive and intentional and strategic. So to answer your question, it's that constant lens of what is my bench, right? Who, if I lost any of these people, so I think about the hit by the bus theory, and I don't want anybody to get hit by a bus. That's also not the takeaway here. But if I lost my best leader tomorrow, what would that mean for my business? Do I have anybody else on the team that could step in and help? And if the answer is no, I'm operating from a deficit. So I want to be thinking about Are there other people that I know? What is my bench? Because one of the things that I believe, and it's written about in many, many places, and I totally agree, is hiring is the most important thing that you will do as a leader, coupled with then whatever it takes to keep the people that you've worked so hard to get in the first place that are excellent, knowing how to hire for excellence and then knowing how to retain that excellence. And that's, if you know how to do that, then the system is, well, I'm always looking at where am I strong? Where are we weak? How is the business evolving? Do I have people that can adapt? Because here's the thing, going back to the original thing that I said up front, over the last 15 years, you didn't have to be that good in sales to have great returns. To be able to say on LinkedIn, I've got 3 exits and I'm this and I'm that. But if you didn't hone your craft, and if you don't continue to hone your craft with the foundations, and the fundamentals, it's a great equalizer of something's missing. And this is where we see this constant turnover between ICs, leaders, executives. It's this like horrible thing that does not need to happen. So I want to think about, okay, and if you're talking about where we are right now, where it's the machine and how do we make it continue to run and be repeatable and grow, I've got enablement, I've got training, I've got an HR team, I've got an ops team, I've got all of these leaders. I want to see how those pieces of the puzzle go together. And yes, it's about jobs to be done, but it's also about assessing what's breaking, what's missing, what's required to get from here to there, because oftentimes we lose sight of Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got Me Here Won't Get You There. And we just take it for face value, or we look at these other metrics just around the performance of the outcome of the goal or the number. But there's all this other stuff to get there. And I find that if you have a feeder system of from SDR to AE to mid market to enterprise to global to team lead to director to, and so on and so forth, how am I creating that so that I don't always have to look outside for my bench? I'm building a good bench on the inside and I'm constantly evaluating what that looks like. So I'm staying ahead of my headcount.
So one of the things I find fascinating about the CRO role is this is true for a lot of leadership roles, but I think it's especially true for the CRO. You are always operating on these multiple time horizons, right? Where is our pipeline this month so that next quarter starts the right place, right? Where are we in quarter so that we hit the number? And you have this incredible pressure, but then you also have these other time horizons of what is, am I going to need this quota capacity in the future? Am I going to need this leadership capability in the future? I mean, it's the job, but it's incredibly complex. But, I think so. I'm curious when you talk about this idea of like really evaluating your talent and your bench, right? How do you think about structuring your week or your month to like ensure that you take the time to do that, to ensure that you've got the space for that type of evaluation? Any recommendations for how to build it into the cadence of the business, besides just the quarterly reviews that that HR might do, that type of thing?
Well, and quarterly reviews are continually proven to suck. So, I will just leave that there. That's a different conversation for a
Sure, sure.
different day. Um, it's like if I'm just relying on a quarterly review signal, there's so much that's missed. And half the time when I've written down what I want to talk to you about for this quarter, I don't remember all the context as to why I'm writing it down to help you. That's ridiculous. So, in my opinion, even an executive leader of other leaders, a CRO, you're going to build this in to how you do it. Then your leaders are going to learn how to do that. And it just sort of slides down. It's like anything that matters, right? I hate going to the dentist, but that appointment is on my calendar 2 times a year. And so it's got to be on your calendar like anything else. And so I believe in James Clear has a great way of managing your time. I've tried that. It's worked really well where you're time blocking, where it's like, okay, every week, this is how I'm going to look at this. This is where this information is. And if it's missing, this is where I'm going to go to get it. And it's not just waiting for the event, right? So I think so many people are like, well, I'll wait for the stand up, or I'll wait for the all hands, or I'll wait for the one-on-one, or I'll wait for the performance review. And all of that's reactive, right? And if you're doing one-on-ones the right way, you're not talking necessarily about this stuff. You're talking about what they need that you can support. And then your job is to look for the common patterns and themes and address those to block and tackle internally and remove those barriers and make it better. But if I'm starting to hear signal on the same themes and the same patterns, now I know, oh, I've got an issue. I've got to figure that out. But I'm digressing. The whole point is it should be something that I believe you should look at least weekly and you should dedicate time. So for me, for example, it's very, very difficult to get on my calendar on a Friday unless all holy hang is breaking loose. That is my day to think. That is my day to actually do cerebral work that I have pushed off because I'm responding and reacting to everything else that's going on, and my calendar changes all the time based on what's happening. But that day is my day. Well, maybe your day is Tuesday. Maybe your day is, I don't know what it is, but you have to put that in. And I think the more fiercely protective we are over our calendars, the better we become, because you can't say yes to everybody wanting your time. You can't say yes to every single meeting. And so if it doesn't have a purpose or you can't be effective in that, you have to say no.
That makes a ton of sense. I think the calendar is has to be precious. It's so easy to lose that preciousness, though, especially it's end of quarter. This deal that we called for the quarter suddenly has an issue, and then suddenly you got to call on Friday. So like those things are such challenges, but you have to protect it. And you're absolutely right.
And
So
maybe it means that you don't go onto LinkedIn for 3 hours that day. Maybe you give up, maybe you give that up and you say, maybe I'm on LinkedIn for 45 minutes today, and that other time I can get back. Like, it's interesting. This is where the time study is a fascinating,
yeah,
fascinating equalizer. You can't hide from it if you're doing it the right way. And if all of a sudden you realize, like, wow, you know what? I want to be helpful and I put myself out there as a helpful person, and I'm spending 5 hours out of my week having calls from people that come to me externally asking for my advice. I still want to be helpful. Maybe I can only do that one time a week because we're in a massive sprint over here. Okay. So it's not that you can't, it's just that you have to limit and manage your time fiercely.
I actually want to go one more level down on something you said earlier about the bench. And I think the bench is incredibly important in any leadership role. And it's that internal bench and external bench. And I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about getting to know you is that I feel like you operate on a really long time horizon. It's like, let's get to know folks, help each other out, let's do those sorts of things, and will eventually, pay off, right? And I think when you think about the CRO role and you think about developing that external bench, like the folks that maybe I want to bring into the business or who could be part of that in the future, any recommendations on how to be proactive about really developing that bench that's outside the company?
I think people talk, right? So one of the best ways to develop the external bench is to develop and support the internal bench.
Okay.
And one of the things that I really like is having an internal team that feels seen, heard, understood, valued, validated, remembered. Because if you're making them feel, even if you have to have the tough conversation, even if it's disagree and commit, whatever it might be, if you're showing up in a way where they feel that all of those things, they're going to show up for you. And if all of a sudden you're helping them and you're blocking and tackling internally, I'll never forget, I worked for a leader and he would come to our meetings and he'd always say, so what's going on? And then he'd always say, what's next? What's next? What's next? He never had a notebook. He didn't have a laptop with him to be taking notes. And this every week it was the same thing and nothing would change. He wouldn't do anything with it. And all of us were like, go away. So do you think externally I'm saying how great it is? No, none of us were. We were all like deep eye roll. So here's the thing. We all know people. And think about the turnover rates. We know people multiplied out. So if I am taking care of my own internal backyard, and then I create a program where it is a meaningful referral program and people are recognized for that and they feel good about their jobs to be done and the way that they're growing internally, that creates a flywheel outside of just your network. Because here's what happens. People think it's like, I'm going to go out on LinkedIn and I'm going to talk about how great we are. And if you are a hot mess of a dumpster fire, you lose credibility on LinkedIn because people talk. I hear it all the time behind the scenes. So if you're going to go to LinkedIn, which is a very, very powerful tool, and I'm not saying don't do that, I'm saying talk about what your team is saying, or have your team enable your team to talk about what their experiences are. Just have limits on, at the end of the day, our job isn't to live on LinkedIn all day long. It's also to get this done. And are we managing our time effectively? But external benches, your network, external bench is your team's network. External bench is collaborating with others to hear about what they're going through and to have introductions made because they trust the way that you're showing up. External bench is there is a gold mine in the graveyard. This isn't just, and I've said this to you, Hayes, for other business stuff. It's not just for our sales pipeline. And you're right. I grew up in enterprise sales, like gnarly, gnarly multi-year deals. I think about it like this: short term, near term, long term. And in each of those buckets, it requires different activities from me every single day. And the minute that I take my foot off the gas of any one of those things, one's going to suffer: short term, near term, long term. It's going to happen though. Same thing with building a bench. It's not like all of a sudden I went to a networking event, I met some people, I said, great, let's keep in touch. We meet on LinkedIn, and that's it. And you never hear from me again. I'm going to be cold when I come back to you in 6 months and say, hey, you know what? I met you at SaaStr. You want to talk about this role that I have? They're not going to feel good about that. So it's like anything where you have to continue to invest in it. And again, it goes back to managing your time. So I like to keep track of my greatest hits list. So there are people that we have talked to, and I only work with a handful of clients at a time so that we can really do what it is that we say we're going to do. Handful of clients at a time, and we only send them 3 to 5 people per role. That's not a huge swath that I operate from, but I want a bigger network. We have, Taryn and we have this list of people that they're phenomenal. We have a lot of people in common that we've heard how phenomenal they are. They've always shown up really well with us. They've always extended themselves to be helpful and gracious, like all the things, and they're really competent. And we've proven that over a lot of different data points. Okay, great. I don't want to lose track of them. So we have a way, just like you do with your pipeline, nurture campaigns. And it's not campaigns, it's just following through and staying top of mind and being useful and not always asking for something. So that when it is time to say, hey, I don't know what your situation is, but I'm starting to think about this role. Are our stars aligned? They're going to be like, maybe not, but you know what? I have 3 other people that they are. It's like that gift that keeps on giving. Good begets good.
Well, so let's shift a little bit. I mean, this is all in line with what we've been talking about. I've been kind of thinking about this and contextualizing the conversation this last little bit about, that leadership team, right? Let's talk a little bit more about ICs for a second. And so one of the things that I think is, just universally true for a sales team of any size is you're gonna have churn, no matter how well you're managing folks. When you get, you know, 50 ICs, there's going to be a handful of people who are, putting in their 2 weeks or whatever, relatively regularly. Building the engine becomes about how do we build, and again, for a CRO, this is kind of operating through a set of levers, right? Like they're not necessarily doing all these interviews themselves and doing that, but how do you build a program that ensures that you get the right ICs, the right sales talent, and that program is executed the way it needs to be at all levels of your leadership between you and those ICs. So help me understand what you've seen be effective there for CROs that need to ensure they've got the street quota at all times that they need, and they have the right people in seat who are who can best address whatever segment they're responsible for.
It goes against, and I know I'm going to get pushback on this, but I think it's the system that prioritizes quality over volume. So instead of just hiring for headcount, which is what
Yeah.
everybody talks about, I want to hire for impact. And so for me to understand that, I need to define that, right? And my leaders need to define that. So as a CRO, I'm thinking about this, but what I'm also thinking about is half the time that we have churn, and don't quote me on half, a big portion of the time, look at the turnover stats. A big portion of the time, I find it's a misalignment of expectations. Um, do I, if I'm thinking as a CRO, I'm thinking about every single person on my team, every leader, every person on the hiring committee. Do they know how to interview?
Mhm.
Do they know how to look for impact? Not just ticking boxes of you made quota, you went to President's Club, you've been in mid market, oh, and you come from our domain. Surely you are phenomenal. And so I think it's about knowing what good actually looks like. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, CROs included, where they're like, I hired people I've worked with before and it didn't work. And I'm just flummoxed by why this is. And so I start to dig in. There's one common theme. You hired for the what, and you missed the why, the how, and all of that other alignment stuff that goes into place. So I like to, if I'm a CRO, I want you to audit your job descriptions on a quarterly basis. What has changed in the business? I also want you to hire for pipeline, not for territory. And Hayes, you're going to love this one. Insert a huge plug for Gradient Works that can help you figure this out so you're not assuming or guessing. Because how many times I've had this happen in my own career, it's like, oh, we're going to go up market. And by the way, I've made this mistake on more than one occasion as I've built teams. We're going to go up market. We're going to, we are in a $50 billion TAM. It is the world, it's our oyster. It's ours for the taking. How am I going to do that? I need people. I need boots on the ground. Let's go. And it's headcount, right? But in enterprise, here's the thing. It takes, if you're building it from scratch, and even if you are in a ramp, it takes people to get fully loaded, even with a Rolodex, fully loaded with a repeatable pipeline. And I'm talking about real enterprise. I'm not talking about a little itty bitty baby deal inside of a big company. That's not enterprise. That's a little baby deal inside of a big brand. It takes them 12 to 18 months to fully ramp. Okay, so first of all, it's about your expectations. Do you even know what that is? Or are you guessing or is somebody telling you? Okay, so that's step one. And this happens at the CRO level where it's like we assume, oh, we're in mid-market, but your mid-market is defined in a very different way. So step one is that. Step two is now that I know that, especially in enterprise, it's the pipeline and not just the territory. Do we have enough for people to actually be successful? Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen an overinflation of throwing a lot of people into a problem or a goal. So we're going to go after enterprise and I need to build out a team of 12. When really all you needed was three. You needed somebody on the West Coast, in the Midwest, and on the East Coast. And so now you have a bunch of people that don't have enough. And now you're upset because they're not responding to leads. Well, the way that your lead scoring is, it doesn't even work. And that's not even enterprise. And you have all this mess on the inside. It's that.
Well, those are things that are definitely near and dear to my heart. One thing, just kind of as a callback to some of the things that we've been talking about in Uncharted Territory, one of the things that in last week's newsletter that I analyzed was, we're seeing this situation where reps are becoming, in many cases, marginal investments. Like you mentioned over the last 15 years, you could kind of maybe have a pulse and like return reasonable investment and have reasonable unit economics just by adding headcount, right? And over the last, I'd say post ZERP, especially in B2B SaaS, that's really not been the case. And so one of the things that we've seen is that if you just look at quotas, for example, like median quotas for reps, they've gone up significantly over the last 10 years, but they haven't even tracked to inflation. Quotas are actually lower than they used to be. But bases have increased along with OTE. OTE is out tracked inflation. And so what we're ending up with is we're now paying higher percentages of commissions on quotas that are actually like in real terms lower than they were in the past, but our bases, our actual hard costs are much higher. So I think what I've heard from a lot of folks that I've been talking to lately is very much in alignment with what you just said, which is like we can't just hire for headcount because it's something that used to cost us $3 million to build a team to go get 10 is now costing us $5 million for that same team to go get 10 because quotas are essentially down, OTs are up, and attainment is down. So that's a huge challenge for lots and lots of folks right now. So let's end on a really specific piece of advice. You've given me lots of really good advice over the years on hiring specifically. Like one of the things I love from you is your focus on scorecards, things like that. And maybe I'm stealing your thunder. I don't know, but what's a really specific piece of advice on building, an effective interview process so that you really know that you're getting high quality folks? Back to your point about quality over quantity. What's something folks can go take away and go do right now?
So, I mean, you did take it. It's called
Sorry.
scorecard. But that, no, no, it's okay. I mean, you knew I was going to say a scorecard, uh, but it's more than just the scorecard. It's not just a hiring process, it's a system. And every part of an effective system has a reason why. And it's a very well defined reason why. And each part of the system has the well defined reason why, but also who, what, how, where, when. And most approach it, even in very well baked companies where there are big people teams, the outdated old school hiring tactics, just like the same in sales, they don't work. And so having 12 steps to do this, to do that, especially with GPT, and I want to do a writing test and I want to do this and I want to do that. I can fake a lot of that. I can go to Glassdoor, I can emulate a lot of things. So if you have a hiring system, make sure that you understand who the hiring committee is and that they have a purpose, that they understand what they're looking for, and that they have the competence to actually do that well. So I find that most people show up to interviews and it's like, I'm going to look for charisma. I'm going to tick some boxes of, okay, they were able to do a role play and they were able to go to President's Club and they've been in our domain. Great. They must be great. And I'll have them do a 30, 60, 90. What does that actually do, though, to prove what it'll really be like to work together, which is my final piece of advice? Design a system that before you ever offer anybody a role, you get as close to theory, or excuse me, close to practice and away from theory. And what I mean by that is, and plenty of you are going to be like, oh, well, we have them do a writing sample, or we have them do a role play, or we have them teach us something new and complex, or we have them do a presentation. Um, Here's the thing about that. When you're doing that, most of you do a gotcha with that, where it's like, I'm going to create a fake scenario. You're not, you're still in theory. That has nothing to do with your business. So if I want to see how you'd really approach, let's say I'm hiring an IC and I want to know that you actually can live in some ambiguity, that this is a new segment for us. We haven't defined all of that yet. And you told me that you want to do this and that you're excited about this. How do I actually validate that? And how am I designing a system to do that? Right. So, a presentation, some would argue that that's the case. But what does that presentation actually tell me? So, if it's about territory and living in ambiguity with territory that I'm inheriting, nobody's ever had before, and it's the whole United States because I'm the first person in and I want to validate it and prove it out. You know what I want to signal for? How that person manages their time. I want to signal for how are you going to prioritize the people that you go after? How are you going to split that out against the entire United States? Given what we've already done, how are you thinking about doing that inside the CRM? Because most people will say, if they're interviewing, yeah, I'm going to go into the CRM and I'm just going to start making calls. And that sounds great, but it's like, if you've done this before, look for the ability to dig deep in the how. So I can take you back to how I did this. You know what I would do? I would tell people the minute that I came into a role, you're going to be confused by me because for the first 3 weeks, you're not going to hear a lot from me because this is what I'm doing. I'm scouring our CRM. I'm understanding who we've already talked to. I'm understanding what happened to them. I'm understanding what's missing. I'm understanding who we actually want to do this with and what the delta is between the two. Then I'm going to do a top 100 list. That doesn't mean that I'm not focusing on the entire country, but I've got to start somewhere. Here's how I think about how I'm going to prioritize my time with that top 100 list. I did this. I haven't done that in years. I own a company that does something very different, but I can still tell you how. And I can go down to the ground level and I can tell you how I did it in Salesforce. Look for that, not just the, I read 100 books this year. This is my favorite. I've read 100 books this year, and it's like, great. Um, what did you learn from your last 5 books and what were they? And it's like, what? I read It Starts With Why by Simon Sinek, and everything starts with why. That doesn't tell you anything about the book. So get to the like, there's always more below the surface. Understand that your hiring system is designed for you to ensure alignment with what is beneath the surface. And also be prepared to share what's underneath your surface because they're going to find out one way or the other. And if you're just stuck on selling, 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 you're going to have some turnover issues because they're going to feel baited and switched, which is what I hear about behind the scenes all the time from the IC level all the way up through executive level. The scorecard has a place in that. So once you define what good looks like and you have those categories, use that as your North Star so that your gut can't play tricks on you. Because I have so many people, I just talked to somebody yesterday. They're like, my decision is based on 80% data and 20% gut. And I said, that's great. How do you validate the 20% gut with proof? And they just looked at me. Scorecard all day long.
Awesome. Well, Amy, I really appreciate the time today. It's been fun to kind of go through the life cycle of a CRO here, and talk about all of these things. So, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on this, and I'm certainly looking forward to our next conversation. So, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And for anybody that joined us, I hope that this was useful. And my hotline's always on. If people want to nerd out about this, I'm here. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. How should people get in touch?
I think I don't think the bot has taken over yet. I think I'm the only Amy Volas on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a great way to find me. Avenue Talent, avenuetalentpartners.com is also a great way to find me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you.